All right, so the next one that I wanted to focus on, and another tip really, was around hydration. Okay, so again, how do we focus? How do we stay energized? We need to stay hydrated. Okay, so one of a common cause of poor concentration is actually dehydration, not drinking enough fluid throughout your day. We know that some studies have shown that even mild dehydration, so losing about 1.5% of your water, can actually cloud your judgment, right? It could affect how you're processing information, right? So we know that the healthy recommendations for fluid intake is about 2 liters per day, and I obviously suggest doing that throughout the day, like not drinking chugging everything all at once. So having a cup with every meal, maybe a cup of between meals, and then incorporating some of those other fluids into the meals that you're eating. So one of the things that we tend to gear more towards in the colder months of the year are soups and stews, right? Perhaps you're having smoothies too, which counts as fluid, but these soups, they're rich, they're hearty, but they also count as fluids. So obviously, if you're experiencing diarrhea, then or vomiting, that's a loss of fluid. You might need more, and you might have a fluid restriction. So that amount, you have to speak with your doctor as to how much you're intaking. But in general, you don't want to rely on the fact that you're thirsty to tell you if you need more fluid, right? Because by the time that you sense that thirst, it might be too late, right? You might be dehydrated at that point. So like I said, something to focus on is just kind of separating that throughout your day. One easy way to tell if you're hydrated is looking at the color of your urine. So maybe not necessarily something to discuss at the table, but I will mention it. So dark yellow or tan suggests that you're dehydrated. You want your fluids, your urine to be clear, so that that's a really good test to tell. So without further ado, we're going to focus on a soup stew. And again, something that's heartier, that has those proteins, that healthy fats, those vegetables, so that again, this could be a one-pot dish, something to have, batch cook it, freeze it, put it in containers, take it out. So plan for your success. Make it at a certain point, maybe even ask a friend or a caregiver, a loved one to prepare it for you if you are too tired or going through other things. But this one is really delicious, and I'm really excited for Jeremy to share it.
Yeah, absolutely. We wanted to choose a soup like Steph mentioned that is obviously going to provide some hydration, but just thinking about, okay, it's fall time, what are sort of the comfort soups that I would like? And this one came to mind first. And so in Italian, it's referred to as Ribollita, which means reboiled, but it's this hearty Tuscan soup where it utilizes a lot of those root veg and heartier veg, beans, like if you had any leftover cooked beans, and into stale bread. It was a very economical soup where you use what you had on hand, and you tried to use ingredients, because you didn't want to waste them or you didn't want to throw them out, right? So it's a little different now. Not everyone might have stale bread lying around, but this is still a great soup to prepare using some of those ingredients that you have in the fridge that you want to use up. Pantry items, again, canned beans, frozen kale, and frozen ingredients. This holds really well up to a soup like this holds really well to any of those types of accessible ingredients. On top of that, we're making a big batch. So like Steph mentioned, trying to focus on putting the work in once and setting yourself up for those future meals when you don't have the energy or don't feel like cooking. So everything is going to be made in a pot, and maybe double the recipe. You know, make a bigger portion if you can. That way, again, you're setting yourself up for those future meals. So really simply, we're going to get right into it. We'll angle the camera here a bit. We're going to start off with some fairly traditional aromatics. So I have an onion here. Now this is, I would say use a large onion. I'm making like half the recipe because I already started making one. But just roughly chopped. Like this is a recipe that there is no, you know, finesse to it. This is just, you know, very roughly chopped ingredients. So we have some onion, and I'm going to put that in our pot. I've got a little bit of olive oil in there with medium heat. And I'm going to throw in some garlic. Again, you know, big aromatic, lots of flavor. And I crushed this just on the side like that. You can slice it, you can mince it. Again, if you want to be more, you know, finesse about it, but this is going to do the trick, and it's going to add a ton of flavor. Plus, in its whole state, or in its, you know, close to whole state, it's going to last. It's going to be able to cook a lot longer without burning. Versus if it's minced and you throw it in, you have a, you know, pretty short time span before it does start to turn and starts to burn. And burnt garlic is just going to make it bitter, so we don't want that. So we're going to soften that a little bit, give it a couple minutes or so, and then you can go ahead and add, you know, whatever other ingredients you have. So I had some carrots, so we're going to throw some carrots in there because it's, you know, we're getting into fall. Any of those hardier vegetables would work really well. So like squash and pumpkin, if you had celery root. This is one that I wanted to use today because it's a very underutilized ingredient. This is a turnip. I was going to quiz everyone, but I'm sure some of you know what it is. This is a turnip. This is, you'll see it in the grocery store. It's the lonely vegetable that most people probably don't even pick up anymore. But it's a root veg, hardy. It's part of that mustard family. So in its raw state, it does have a little bit of a bite, a little bit of that heat to it. But peeled and sort of diced up and thrown into like a soup or a stew, it just has this really nice hardiness to it, this comfort to it, with some flavor. So it's not like some bland ingredient. It does have some nice flavor to it. So if you haven't tried it in a while, this is a great recipe to utilize in it. Okay, so peeled, diced, carrot, turnip, again, whatever root veg you want to add, you can toss in there, and just soften that for just a couple of minutes. Again, it's going to go through its full cook once everything is in with the liquid. So we just want to caramelize them slightly at this stage. And then we're going to go in with some greens. Now, this is the roots of this ribollita, this stew, come from more northern Italy, in Tuscany, really. And there is a lot of kale, a lot of these hardier vegetables grown in the northern part, more of the northern part of Italy. So you'll see this type of kale, which is like a black kale, or they call it a Tuscan kale sometimes, that is a much more robust green as opposed to spinach. Now you can use spinach in here, you can use chard in here. Again, no rules, use what you have. But some of those cruciferous vegetables, I'm just going to show you what's going on in the pot here. Some of those cruciferous vegetables, like cabbage and like these hardier kales, can hold, their texture holds up a little bit better when they're slow cooked for a longer amount of time. So in soups and stews, this is a great option. Okay, so we're using this kale. Any kale will work. You can use cabbage as well, frozen or fresh. I'll mention that. And the only thing that you do want to remove is the rib out of the middle, the stem, that hardier stem, because it's extremely fibrous, doesn't really break down that well. So just remove that, and then you're left with this, the leaves of the kale. And I'm just gonna roughly tear it with my hands. It's a kind of larger pieces. Again, this is very, very rustic soup or stew. So, you know, you don't really need too much knife work. And I cut up the onion, I cut up the carrot and those vegetables, but like Steph mentioned before with the frozen green beans, you know, use frozen. We love using frozen. And this is, again, a great dish to use frozen in. So, you know, they have frozen squash, they have frozen sweet potato, frozen carrots, onions, all kinds of freezer frozen produce items. So use those in here, they'll work just as well.
Yeah. And the other thing I find that's really easy about these is that you can get the different colors. Okay. So obviously, you know, in a soup, you've got your aromatics, so your onion, your garlic, your fennel, which are all white, so that's okay, right? And then you're adding your carrots, so that's some orange color. So again, these bright colors are adding those antioxidants that are really beneficial for, they each have different properties known as flavonoids, and those have protective effects against those healthy cells to prevent cancer development. All right. So the other thing I want to mention is kale, chard, those dark leafy greens. Super, super important. I'm sure everybody's heard how important dark leafy greens are. But why? Really, it's because of the folate. Okay. And folate is one of those nutrients that actually helps with energy levels, right? So when we talk about anemia, right? So that is like a potential cause for feeling tired or fatigued. It could be that you're low in iron. It could be that you're low in vitamin B12 or folate. And the folate really comes from those dark green leafy vegetables. There's no specific test that we could do that kind of evaluate someone's folate blood levels. But something to think about is, are you having enough dark greens? Right. And usually, you know, when we're cooking those vegetables, I'd suggest like don't boil them, because when you eat them, the nutrients are leaching. However, in a soup, they're all staying contained. So even though maybe some of the nutrients are being leached from the kale or the chard into the water, well, you're eating that, you're drinking that, you're sipping that, right? So no nutrient is lost, right? Just tons and tons of flavor, which is awesome.
Okay, so kale's in, just softening them up a little bit. Here's when we can add a little bit of extra flavor. So I'm keeping it fairly simple. I've got some dried oregano, but you can put some thyme, you can put some basil. If you like chili flakes, you can throw some chili flakes in there. It's completely up to you. Something that was common, again, because this is a traditional stew that would, you know, you utilize all those ends and scraps. The sort of end piece, the rind of the Parmesan cheese, which you don't really use, usually you can save them, you can freeze them, and then you throw that rind into a stew like this, and that is going to provide this really, really nice umami, this really nice punch of flavor as it's cooking, and then you just take the rind out and discard it after. So that's, I mean, if you used to throw out your rinds, you know, freeze them, save them for the soups and stews. Okay, so we have oregano in there. You have the parm rind, you can throw the parm rind in there. And then I'm gonna throw in some legumes. Now, traditionally for this, I mean, you can use whatever you want. You would see like a field bean or like a kidney bean used for something like this. Today I'm making it with lentils, and I love the addition of lentils here. And again, this can be canned beans thrown in, or canned lentils. I'm using dried lentils, and that's sort of the nice thing about dried lentils is they don't take too long to cook. They don't require any pre-soaking. So I wouldn't throw dried beans in this because that would take hours and hours to cook. But dried lentils, no problem. If you're using red lentils, like 15 minutes, they're done. I'm using green lentils today, so they're gonna take a little bit longer, like 25 minutes, 30 minutes. But again, they don't need any pre-soaking, so I can go right from dried into our pot. And I go with it.
And again, this is a great way to add that protein, that bulk to you know, your dish. And again, it's adding that fiber. So again, like when we think about that meal, I know I always say this, but I find that like it's a concept that's so easy, but yet we sometimes forget, is that check mark. So making sure that each meal that you have has those different components of protein. So here you're getting your lentils. They have your colored vegetables. So you have your chard, you have your kale, you have your onions and your carrots. And then we have, you know, some whole grains. So we're going to add some kind of that bread in as well. But really this is like a soup, right? So you're getting your hydration as well. So just kind of thinking, and then, you know, adding in that flavor, whichever way or how you can. Using dried herbs and spices is really the best way to go, because that is adding those additional plant-based features that are giving you those antioxidant properties.
Okay, so now we're going to add our liquid, and it's going to come in two ways. So the first is some tomatoes. So I'm using use a large can of tomatoes. I prefer the whole tomatoes and then kind of just crush them up with a fork or your hand. But you can even get like the tomato puree, that works as well. So I'm gonna go ahead and add that first. And then fill up that can with just water. You can use stock as well. You can definitely use like a veg stock or chicken stock for more flavor, especially if you have some that's left over. You know, it's a good way to utilize it. But otherwise, simply just water will do here. And that is most of the work. So what we do at this point is you're going to bring it up to a boil. Once you start to see the bubbles, we're going to put a lid on like this, reduce the heat, and just let it kind of slow cook, let it stew away. Everything, you know, there's the heart of your vegetables that you want to soften up a bit, but then the lentils is what you need to cook. So that'll take pretty much as long as those beans take or those lentils take. So about 30 minutes. You can even go a little bit longer to an hour, slow cooking, and then top up the water if it is starting to dry out a little bit, because, you know, we're talking about hydration. You want that liquid in there, but you also don't want it to dry out too much. And then, like Steph mentioned, you know, you can throw in like spelt or fado or barley in this too to sort of mix it up a little bit to add that whole grain component. But something that was a little more traditional was using some of that sort of harder, that stale bread that's not really edible anymore, right? And it's a way to kind of add a little bit more bulk to the soup, right? But also, if it is like a nice whole grain bread, like Steph mentioned, you're adding that whole grain. So this is just some leftover, it's like a whole grain, I think it was like a sun-dried tomato bread. I even toasted it up a little bit more just to kind of mimic the staleness. It wasn't really that stale, but to get that nice kind of crunchiness. And this I would add closer to the end. Otherwise, it would just turn to mush, and it would soak up all the liquid, which it will do even if you add it at the end. So you might have to adjust the water just to let you know. But last 5 minutes of cooking, you throw that in, and you're good to go. And this is what we have. Bring it back over here. This really nice, hearty kind of stew. Trying to get that camera angle on. With the kale and the turnips and the lentils, and this is comfort food. This is serious comfort food. So we're gonna plate that up. Put
total summer. It's total autumn vibe for.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and like I said, you know, sometimes, you know, you're super hungry. But really you're thirsty. So also something to kind of note, and again, to reiterate on that caption of making sure that you're hydrated throughout your day. Again, it's really going to help with your focus, your concentration, especially as we get into a new season. And, you know, people have new projects, new routines, new things that they are focusing on, and we want to help that maximize your focus. Awesome. It's delicious.
There is our Ribollita or autumn Ribollita.